and welcome to a Most Excellent 80s Movie Podcast on the Most Excellent Podcast Network. It's the podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian endeavor to examine the decade that made them weird. This is Season 1, Episode 00, Most Excellent Intro episode, whereupon we will meet our hosts and learn of their mission. I'm Chrissy.
I'm Nathan.
And we're ready to be excellent. So, Nathan, you're our filmmaker and by far the more qualified person to be discussing 80s movies. So tell us a little bit about you.
So I am a local Phoenix-based filmmaker. I do genre comedy. So I do silly things, but with genres that I love, like sci-fi or horror. Not that often, but and just, I'm a movie lover, but I love to kind of, wink or do basically like the comedy overlay version of it. So like Three Amigos or Guardians of the Galaxy or Big Trouble in Little China. That's kind of my sweet spot. But yeah, so I'm a film lover and also being a filmmaker, I'm also a film lover. So the different eras and things like that, especially the 80s, because that's when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the movies that
formed our mythology.
Yes, exactly. So much better at putting things that way. Yeah, for sure. And all the things you make are really, really funny, and everyone should definitely check them out.
Send me money.
Yes, definitely. Send money. That's the goal of this podcast.
And so you're our comedian.
Yes, I am one of the creative directors at National Comedy Theater here in Phoenix, and we do improvised comedy. So whose line is it anyway? Sort of style comedy. And so I perform, I teach, I direct our team, I coach our high school improv league, I teach corporate executives to learn to have fun.
You have a physical theater, a place of business.
Yes, a literal house of comedy.
With an address.
Whereas
yes. My production company exists in an ether. It exists in an online form.
Yes, but your movies are online and everyone can view them.
Right, and for free.
Yes. And I, definitely also was very influenced by the movies and just sort of the style of things of the 80s. And I kind of love that now things are sort of throwing back to that.
It takes 30 years.
Yeah.
For us to kind of, for it to become, for us to both kind of like figure out what a decade is. Like you kind of jam a lot of things. It's like some things I think of the 80s were really kind of like 78 to like 88. And then there's some stuff where I think that's so 90s and I see it, oh, that was 89. So it's like we kind of jam in our perception of what is very 80s and what is the 80s. And also it's like right now it's like I don't know what the like 2010s are, you don't really get a sense. It's hipsters.
Yeah.
It's hipsters and unfinished construction.
It's hipsters who like the 80s now. Like now they're into the 80s.
Yeah. So it's and then I'm positive that when someone does like a movie of like the era that we're in now, one of the parodies is going to be unfinished construction as art form. Like if you go like into a coffee shop and half the walls aren't completed and like the ceilings just it's like, oh no, that's so cool.
It's so neat.
Unfinished construction.
Everything's like the inside of a Chipotle. Yeah, it's just like unvarnished plywood and particle board and like exposed
it's so real.
Electrical. Yes. So what the heck are we up to? What are we trying to do here at Most Excellent 80s Movie Podcast? Our mission that we kind of set out is to take a comedic and hopefully informative look back at the movies from a decade that we both love through possibly different levels of experience,
Yeah, there's some movies that will have defined our sense of right and wrong in our comedy, and then some just totally fell off the radar.
Yeah, completely missed the boat on some of those movies or even whole genres.
Yeah.
And of course you're looking at it from the eyes of a filmmaker, and me looking at it from the eyes of an idiot who makes fun of things.
Woohoo.
Yeah. Uniquely qualified. And also kind of to look at it like with 2017 eyes and say like, do we love this because it was a movie of our childhood, or is it really good?
Right.
Or were we wrong the whole time? So we're going to do 10 episodes this season, not counting this intro. We're going to do a movie from each year of the 1980s.
Right. So this season is going to be 80, 81, 82, 83, so on. You can.
Yeah. So we chose randomly for season 1.
Well, from a cultivated list.
Yes. Yes, exactly. But there's no, they're not like all the top grossing movies or anything like that. They're just movies we chose.
Right.
Based on
they were
years.
kind of cultural, important 80s movies too, you know.
And we tried to get a little bit of variety, a little bit of horror, some comedy, some action.
It's going to be stuff that was more or less mainstream, though, that you would have heard when it came out. There's not like Jim Cotta or like, Raw Force and things like that in there.
No, that'll be season 12 when we're like out of movies to talk about.
What you didn't see.
Stuff you never heard of.
What you wish you had never saw.
From the 80s. So we're gonna talk about all the movies. We're gonna summarize them. We're gonna kind of try as best we can to put it in context of like what was happening in the world in the 80s, like when the movie
play
came
the
out.
trailers so you kind of get that sort of like sense memory of what it was like.
What it was like, and I think it's important too to like we each chose some of the movies to create our own little summary of, because I think it's important. Like if people have never seen them. Maybe they don't want to sit down and watch it all before they listen to us blather on about it. So we'll give them a little summary just in case they haven't seen it. And of course, IMDb summaries are just terrible and weird.
We'll stumble through our own versions.
We're going to make up our own. Yeah, and we're going to just sort of see what we can mine out of taking a look back at these movies.
Sound effect.
Time travel sound effect. So what are some of your favorite things from the 80s? What are your favorite 80s movies, 80s music?
Right. So I was born in 76. I don't really remember the 70s though. You really don't start remembering things until you're about 3 or 4, and so the 70s were more or less done.
Yeah.
I think technically my very first memory is of a drive-in movie in 1979.
Oh, wow.
Meatballs.
Oh.
And I hadn't seen it for 40 years.
I'm not sure that's appropriate.
I saw it. Yeah. Well, they assumed I wouldn't remember anything.
Of course. Oh, no. Have I been incorrectly assuming that with my children by showing them things?
Well, it'll be fun. So, yeah, really the 80s was my childhood from like age of 4 to 14, and so a lot of times when you're young, like those stories, like especially now with like kids who've got like DVD, with VHS and DVD and things like that. We didn't get a VHS player until I was 11.
Oh no! That's terrible.
And so, but it's like you notice that like the kids would rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. It's almost like they're gravitating and programming themselves to stories that they love and like And so the 80s was kind of like that for me at that age. So like with Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and just every couple of months there'd be something like the Karate Kid that would come out, and you just go, "Oh my God, karate is awesome! How come I never knew of karate?" And so the 80s was also very kind of pop culture-y explosion, very consumer-y, like I think Ronald Reagan, he allowed commercials to be longer than to be as long as 30 minutes. So that's when like things like G.I. Joes and Transformers were basically created just to sell a product, but it was in the guise of entertainment. So you had a ton of that, like of consumerism during the 80s, to where they're just like shoveling you things like He-Man and movies and things like that. And
there's a serial tie-in.
With like Steven Spielberg and the kind of the birth of that modern blockbuster. Everything wanted to be like this big new product that they wanted to sell you on, but they did it with entertainment. And when you're a kid, you just eat it up.
Oh yeah.
And also, I mean, a lot of the stories were great. That's when they started like really skewing movies and entertainment towards kids too, because like the 70s not so much,
right,
not as much,
and then they kind of invented PG-13
after Temple of Doom and Red Dawn,
so it was kind of like, and the first movie that we're going to watch in episode 1 was Airplane, which was rated PG, and I was definitely like,
that's
what?
definitely yeah.
So they, kind of inventing all of that stuff in the 80s. I definitely so I was born in 1980. So the first 3 years are kind of a blur for me as well, but I had a VHS player basically the entirety of my life. My dad was actually a video editor for a time.
Oh wow!
So we had a huge VHS tape to tape editing bay in my laundry room. So we had basically VHS copies of everything that ever existed. Cool. And oftentimes they would be on 2 tapes because, try and fit as much as you can onto one tape. So the beginning of Top Gun and the end of Top Gun were on 2 different VHS tapes. And if you wanted to watch Top Gun, you kind of had to watch a lot of The Princess Bride in order to get to it. So I definitely watched a lot of movies over and over and over again, via the VHS. I remember
just totally being blown away when my neighbor, he was my dad's age, had all these toys. He had the first Atari I'd ever seen. He had the first VHS player, and it had Star Wars on it. It's like, oh my god, it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
Turned out he was a pot dealer. It's probably my dad's pot dealer, but that's why I had all those new toys all the time. But I just remember, I still remember at his house. It was literally next door, and then just being mesmerized by Star Wars, because I'd technically seen Star Wars at the age of 1 or 6 months, but I don't remember much. I was a huge Star Wars fan. I definitely remember seeing Return of the Jedi in theaters, but yeah, just seeing a VHS player and then Atari, it was just brain breaking.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, I didn't see a lot of the early 80s movies in the theater, but we, every Friday night would go to the video store and everybody got to rent 2 movies, and then the whole weekend was spent watching movies. So we would rent movies over and over again, and definitely got to see things somewhat retroactively in that way. But I was also definitely as a teenager in the 90s, very much an 80s kid. Mm-hmm. Just always wanted to be Molly Ringwald in a John Hughes movie. So I very much styled myself after Cyndi Lauper and the cool kids from the 80s, instead of leaning into that 90s sort of bring it on genre of things. All right, cool. So do you have, if you had to pick a very favorite 80s movie, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on, maybe there isn't one.
Probably Raiders Lost Ark. It's not very 80s, but in terms of the 80s, when I think of the 80s movies, I think of E.T. You know, that was a seminal movie. I remember when that one came out, and the entire world was about E.T. when that came out. So that in my association, I was obsessed with Raiders Lost Ark, but I don't remember seeing it. And so it was kind of tough for me to tie it into a time. I just remember it as my formation as a kid.
Always running around in a fedora.
Yeah, I didn't run around as E.T.
No, E.T. is terrifying.
Yeah.
I have a deeply rooted childhood fear of everything that's associated with E.T. I think when I think of 80s movies, I just go straight to John Hughes. I think of Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink,
Ferris
Bueller, Bill and Ted, all of the, Back to the Future, that sort of teenage wish fulfillment kind of movies.
Zapped.
Yes. Oh my gosh, some of the things that they got away with in the 80s. My goodness. All right, so that's what we're up to. That's what we're doing. We hope that you will join us right away, right now. In fact, just click through to the next episode.
We're going to record it in 5 minutes. So.
It's going to be released all together as a package deal. So
do we want to? So did we already said what our next movie is? Our first movie. It's Airplane.
Episode 1, Airplane!
Exclamation point.
Yes, Airplane! Exclamation point. And what do you think? Do we want to tease some of the first ones that we're going to do, or do we want to let it be a surprise?
I would say at the end of the episode
we'll reveal. What our next
we'll say
pick
what
is.
it is. Yeah.
That way you can guess ahead to what the 1982 movie is going to be.
Right.
And you got to listen to all of episode 1 to find out.
I'm excited.
Yeah. You guys know the podcast drill. Obviously, go listen to episode 1, airplane, exclamation point. But also, like us, subscribe, all that stuff. You know how it works. Join our Facebook group. It's the Most Excellent Podcast Facebook group. Thumbs up, all that, whatever feels right, whatever feels good.
So where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me at NCT Phoenix, or National Comedy Theater Phoenix, which is nctphoenix.com, of course, N for National, C for Comedy, T for Theater, and then Phoenix, all spelled out, .com. And where can people go to take a look-see at some of your filmmaking geniuses?
So my production company is Squishy Studios, so you can find Squishy Studios on Facebook and on Twitter. And then also, if you want to check out my sci-fi comedy web series, Voyage Trekkers, it's also on the Facebooks and the Twitters.
Yes, highly recommend. Check it out. You won't be sorry. All right. And so, as always, here at Most Excellent Podcast, Most Excellent 80s Movie Podcast, we, send you out into the world with the message to be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.
Glad we got that right.
Yeah.